he says basically, he's very happy that he's, this cold, clinical emotion that feeds off the horror of others. It's like, okay, cool. He's like me, he's a psychopath. But even then, I've stabbed people before. You feel emotion, you feel like stoked. It's like, okay, I don't want to fucking die. Okay, cool, I can hurt people again. There's still an emotion, there's still a lot of energy, even without a sense of empathy. And this is especially true for sadism. These rights literally feeding off the terror of others here, and I'm thinking that can be a very enjoyable idea to investigate in a story, but the problem is we don't have that, because this is literally not what is shown here. Yeah, he's a smart ass. Like he says, oh, you got a cute pay to spare now guy, I've stabbed him 4 times. Welcome back to the Unreal Press, and I'm not sure if this counts as a podcast yet, but I got actual views on the first one, so we're back doing another episode of the Writing Critiques. That's right, we're taking the piss out of writing general again, because it's not like I have anything better to do with my life on a Saturday night. Since James Craig has standards and principles and autism, I brought on an entirely different artist to, be the co-host of this. Welcome, Miles. Thanks for coming on.
Hey, man. Great to be here. Big fan of the show.
Cool. 100%. Yeah, you actually reached out to me on Writing General, which is not uncoincidentally the very thread on Lit we are now critiquing. Yeah, that's right. You could actually just PM me and you could just come on episodes. I have no barrier to entry.
Yep. I made a post on the Writing General. I said, how can I join the Discord? Link. I joined in, and well, here we are scrolling through the WG.
Yep. Yeah. So as always, I am LA Labuschagne, and today we are starting off with Heeljack, which is a PDF of, I have no fucking clue, that somebody PM'd me on the Discord, which you can join. Link in the description. So
this post came from a guy who, this is a clip from part of his books. This is like the 1,000-word introduction.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I have posted that on Writing General myself, actually, like the introduction to some of my stuff. And I mean, it's like a coin flip where I'm getting called a sued, or people are saying, hey, this is decent. And I reply, wow, would you spend money for this? And they would say no. So yeah, let's see if I'd spend money for this one. Just call me Heeljack. Most people think of grown up as packing your bag and leaving home. But in my opinion, you haven't grown up until you've realized that you don't have a home to go back to. That the life you had was just an idea cooked up by your folks. Usually that beautiful parental ideal wears pretty thin when you start popping pimples and humping anything with a pair of legs on it. I'm old as hell now and have made myself a home. An entire station, really. Out here on the Edgeworlds. I got kids caterwauling around, raising hell, and more wives itching for it than I got it to give anymore. But being an adult is all about making your own home and trying to do it better than what you got. And what I got wasn't exactly hard to beat. Suppose I owe you a formal introduction. So call me Heeljack like everyone else does, and let's leave it to that. It's not my Christian name, but it served me well enough just fine when I rode through hell on my way to being saved. You see, I was born in a mining colony over in the Omaha system. A big red dust bowl called Platte, if you're familiar. And while my folks in the better part of the colony called themselves faithful, they mixed worship with gospel into a nasty one called politics. My pa fancied himself a future church elder for Platte, and while he was busy, I took a nasty turn somewhere along the line and ended up a profligate sinner, without 1 ounce of pity or shame in me. It all ended poorly, of course. I was drinking like a damn fish by 15 years old, and killed a man at 17. As one does. As much of a shock to me as anyone else the way it happened. After study one day, me and some of my friends were knocking back shots of high-proof stuff down at the loading docks, when a pair of crewmen from a passing freighter came by and struck up a conversation. Our little arcology never had more than a single vessel visiting, so we knew the outfit immediately. We were all kids and hiding behind corrugated crates about 10 feet tall and 6 times as wide, filled to the gills with copper, which was about the only thing Platte was good for. They was friendly at first, no doubt interested in having a taste of our hooch. We peppered them with questions about space or life. I myself had a brown bottle of wine, or so I called it. It was some juice-based crap brewed up myself down an old abandoned maintenance shaft of the arcology's heating level. One of the spacers, dark-haired fellow about a head taller than me, asked for a nip of my goods, and I was happy enough to oblige. He took a half-empty bottle, sucked down a deep draught, and gave it back to me containing only about a half a spit's worth of backwash. "The hell," I said. "You got money to compensate for that mighty slip?" Not a drop, said he. And I suppose if you do have an issue with that, you ought to take it out with one of your weirdo elders for adjudication. He knew he had me by the balls. We were followers of the Latter-day Saints, don't take to drinking as a habit, but rather as a sin. About 5 years my senior, I suppose he felt entitled to take what I had without a care in the world. My friends, none of them any older than myself, all had a good laugh at me, and I felt like the assembled group had built up quite the tab at my expense. I had hell's fire burning up my neck. My hands shook. Give me a K and we'll call it even. The grinning bastard had the gall to laugh right in my face. I'd rather just walk away and be done with you. And he did. Or attempted to, at least. He made it about 3 steps before my switchblade found his lower back. He cried out, fell down, holding an arm out to block me, but not fast enough before I caught him with 3 more strikes. Rear thigh, front thigh, stomach. Each left a gaping red mouth in the fabric of his jumpsuit. I was still shaking, blood thunder in my ears. Got a few K to spare now, smart guy? He was scrambling away on his rear as best he could, calling me every name in the book. His shipmate swooped in beside him in case I went after him again, but neither he nor any of my friends made a move towards me as I stood frozen with the knife in hand. I heard my friends arguing behind me. Call the doctor, he's bleeding blood from that leg. But the alcohol. There's worse things than penance. By Hashem, his face is going grey. I didn't wait to see how it resolved. An animal instinct in me knew I'd be delivering a killing blow, as swift as it was stupidly done. Without a word, I walked to the personnel gate, screwed on an atmospheric helm, and slung a spare oxy tank over my shoulder before sliding out into the red rust desert beneath the star-strewn sky. I didn't look back to see if anyone followed me. By all accounts, I should have been chucking out that half bottle of booze I'd drunk, but instead, I felt a serenity greater than prayer had ever given me. It was a new side of myself I would have grown more acquainted with in my exile, clinical coldness that fed off the terror of others. At that age, I'd never spent much time surface-side, and I remember how alien it felt to walk fully suited. The way the muffled crunch of the gravel echoed up from the boots, the way the crosswind flooded my loose sleeves yet didn't touch my face. I don't know where I was headed, only that here wouldn't do. When the lights protected against the grounded ship, a hulking mass of metal on a lake of concrete beside our pyramidal arcology, I went the other way. Over a rocky dune to a supply shed and found what I sought, a covered airspeeder used for mineral surveys staked beside a few tarp-down boxes. I ripped the sheet off the speeder, ran my citizen card to start it, and blasted the motor. I by then had some notion of a plan. In truth, it was a plan I'd been considering for the better part of a year, but hadn't had the cojones to try for fear of breaking my mother's heart. But there was no avoiding that now, so it didn't weigh on me none. It's strange, really, but the murder freed my mind and made the big things of my life, the expectations of a mother even, seem trite. I burned vapor through the night, the speeder's motor vibrating against the hood, as rusted heels curved up and down beside me on the way due north to the nearest arcology, called Smithtown. I won't bore you with all the thoughts racing through my head that night. They were probably the same as any man other has They were probably much the same as any other man has expecting execution, and swung on a dime between euphoric self-realization and panic self-doubt. I didn't regret what I'd done, but I sure regretted how I'd done it. Dawn's light came and woke an ammonia-yellow sky as my speeder's motor began to stutter as the power block ran dry.
Very nice.
Well then, so Miles, what are your thoughts?
So, for context, this is a piece from a gentleman sci-fi novella that he's working on. That's about 80% of his first chapter. He's testing a voice for the possible future project. My first thought when I read this was I thought this was a flash fiction, and I didn't like it because it's stretching too much story in too much short of a time. Now that I know that it's part of a larger novella, my second question is, where does she go from here?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good observation. Because, yeah, I'd agree with you that this doesn't really work as a short story. Mostly because it doesn't actually tell that much of a story at all. It's just this guy stabs a guy to death and then drives off. There's too much exposition to warrant that.
Correct. And but it comes to me as a voice is somebody is, let's say, reclining in a bar or on his porch, and he's telling somebody who's come up to him and asked him about his life. Whereas if this was sort of told the perspective of as he was experiencing it, I think it would be a much stronger story, much stronger point of view.
Yeah, that's one thing that always makes me skeptical about these framing devices. That is saying, putting it like, as this guy is, he's an old guy, he's telling us something new, probably over another glass of hooch. He's saying, back in my day, I did X, Y, Z. And I'm thinking, well, why can't I just see you doing X, Y, Z then? So, I hope this framing device plays off. That's my major concern here. And it's not just this intro, we have this whole narrative and then it ends with the dude sitting back and saying, and that's how I met your mother.
And it's actually interesting. The first sentence of this story kind of sets up that it ends at the end of this sample. The first sentence reads, most people think of growing up as picking up your bag and leaving home, but in my opinion, up until you realize you don't have a home to go back to. That sets the tone of the end of this story is sort of him realizing I don't have a home to go back to. And you reach that at the end of the sample. There's nowhere to grow past.
Yeah, that is a flaw I realized with that is he basically says exactly what he's going to do and then he does it. But the problem is, well, what the fuck are you going to do for the next 70k words, bro? I presume
Right.
it's something about the actual home that he proceeds to build in the second paragraph. But even there,
Right.
you explained exactly what this chapter is, but the problem is, there's nothing wrong with that as an introduction. And I think in many circumstances it can work very well. But I think it fails here because you've used it as the introduction to the entire story. So you've told me, here's what I'm going to do. But the problem is, everything you've explained you're going to do, you've effectively already done.
Right. So there's no reason to continue on in a story. I think it could be a lot stronger if he sort of changed how he's telling the story as a voice. But overall, I mean, I thought the prose was reasonably well done. I didn't scream with too many adjectives. It didn't scream with abusive adverbs. It had a very specific voice. You could tell that this character is sort of well thought out. Maybe not perfectly rounded, but it's been thought out of what kind of point of view he's presenting. I just
Yeah,
thought the presentation just wasn't there.
yeah. The voice I found it had character, and I noticed he messaged me about this and said, if possible, can you read it out in a southern accent? Granted, that's the voice I used to read everything out because it sounds aesthetically pleasing to probably me and like two other guys. But yeah, I mean, obviously, I'm first going to note the incongruity that real life Mormons don't sound like that because they're not from the South. Most of them are from Utah, which is really more like in flyover country. But
Right.
that incongruence aside, presuming maybe they've in the far far future of whenever this takes place, they've broken across the Mason-Dixon line. But yeah, I found the voice works, and I think one thing that I can appreciate about this is he uses the framing device, and you can see it here because it is still in past tense, but he's still willing to convey the emotions that the younger version of the character feels, which I think goes a long way. But yeah, I think the execution is still lacking. I don't, especially reading the fight scene, there's no real tension here. It's just murder.
Right. You sort of hear about it as if you're reading a newspaper. Like he stabbed him. He stabbed him. Kind of get the sensation of a little bit of tension with the blood in the ears, but the way it's told is again as if you're kind of sitting at a bar or he's telling you from his porch, and that is a way to tell the story. But if you're trying to build tension, you want to bring your reader and your focus down into everything that's happening in that moment.
Yes, I can definitely agree with that. That you need to focus and emphasize these things if you want the reader to care about them. And he tries to justify this, which is what I find strange. He says basically, he's very happy that he's, this cold, clinical emotion that feeds off the horror of others. And it's like, okay, cool. He's like me, he's a psychopath. But even then, I've stabbed people before. You feel emotion. You feel like stoked. It's like, okay, I don't want to fucking die. Okay, cool. I can hurt people again. There's still an emotion. There's still a lot of energy, even without a sense of empathy. And this is especially true for sadism. These rights literally feeding off the terror of others here. And I'm thinking that can be a very enjoyable idea to investigate in a story, but the problem is we don't have that because this is literally not what is shown here. Yeah, he's a smart
Right.
ass. Like he says, oh, you got a few K to spare now, guy, after you stabbed him 4 times. But there's no reveling in it. There's nothing that actually matches what we are told later. We're not shown that.
Right. The line that he says towards the end is, "I didn't regret what I'd done, but I sure did regret how I'd done it." And I think that's an interesting line to put in there because it shows that sure the character doesn't regret it, but he regrets how he murdered somebody. This may just be me reading between the lines. It could be that he regrets killing as an act of like impulse, as opposed to I'm going to kill you in order to rob you or take something or do something.
Right, right. Yeah, I think that could definitely be a part of it. Because, yeah, he says that, he wasn't thinking of actually seriously running away because he's afraid he'd piss off his parents. And so he sort of does this all spur of the moment. But on the other hand, I think, as far as I could tell, it was more like the mastery of it because, the dude's struggling, he's in pain, it's caused chaos, and it's basically thrown him out. So I thought, like,
Yeah.
I was expecting some kind of calculated revenge off this instead of just him being mild and having his vodka stolen.
I think it kind of deflates the seriousness of the murder, and he's just like, I killed him, and I was going to run away anyways, so I just kind of ran away. Maybe that's a way to present your story as, oh, it was an incidental thing, and maybe the tension rises in somewhere later. I feel like this is a perfect place in the story to really draw out the tension of, oh crap, I just killed somebody. I got
Yeah,
to get the hell out of here.
yeah, there wasn't that. And again, I'd say if you want to do like a nonchalant badass, he just knifes a guy and then walks off. That's fine, but that's not what we have here because what we are shown and what we are told don't match in that sense. Because like he's planned
Right.
this. It's written he has a covered airspeeder that he's just got here just in case. And I'm thinking, okay, you've planned all of this, but you were too bitch to actually follow through with it. That isn't the kind of person who just one day, snaps and knifes a guy 4 times. It's like stabbing a guy once, yeah, we've all been there. But constantly doing it.
Sure, we have.
Okay. But also, like, what I notice here is where he's going. These are vitals. Rear thigh, front thigh, major arteries there, and same with the stomach. You're going to split organs. And so it's not like he's fighting in self-defense. Not like, caught him on the arm or just threw him off or forced him away. No, he fought to kill this guy. Which again seems like if you are prepared to do that over a bottle of moonshine, why are you not prepared to disappoint your mother?
Fair point. And speaking, I guess, kind of reeling it back to the vehicle thing, it seems like the vehicle was a matter of convenience for the author.
Yeah, it feels kind of
And
contrived.
right. And I think this is an easy trap to fall into that you're like, okay, I need a way to expedite the story to where I want it to go next. You sort of write like these quick and dirty shortcuts, these cut through the woods in order to get in the direction you're going for. And I think that's kind of what happened here.
Yeah.
Something that can be fixed, but something to note.
What just literally comes to mind with me to make this justifiable, because until this point, literally until the paragraph before that, we have not told anything about him wanting to run away, basically. So what I thought is, it's told that the guys are working on the loading docks. They're basically stevedores. And I'm thinking, instead of that, why don't you make this guy a surveyor? Why don't you make him like the actual schmuck who has to go out on his bike and do whatever he has to do on plat? Because then
Right.
we know he can ride the bike, we know he has access to the bike, and we know he knows where it is. And he could just be in the dock sitting there because why wouldn't you if you're a bored teenager and out-of-towners turn up? So I'm thinking that is the kind of thing you could put in to justify this escape.
Right. Because then he already has the vehicle. It's been established. It's part of him, part of his story, and he knows it makes it flow a little bit cleaner. It's not, as you said earlier, it's not contrived. It's just boom. I got to escape. How do I do it? On the bike. Let's go.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd say that's definitely a solution. Because like I said, and it's basically my closing thoughts on the matter, the prose is fine. It's not going to jump hard. It's not Faulkner tier prose here. But it gets the job done, it carries over the voice, and it's plausible for the character.
Right.
But
My closing
yeah.
thoughts are about the same.
Cool. Well, this has been Heel Jack by Anon. And I think, yeah, let's move on to the next one then, which I believe we agreed Wish Mountain by Anon.
Yes.
Prolific guy, this Anon.
Yeah, he seems to write a lot of stuff that we're reading today.
Oh yeah, tradition. I mean, you know this, you've listened to it. But for anyone who's still listening after 20 minutes, e.g. Anon who wrote Heeljack, one thing I always like to do with these podcasts is crack open something to drink. I mean, I like doing that anyway, but helps if you actually have to talk. So today I'm drinking a First Watch whiskey, which is one of the few Canadian whiskies you can get here down south in SA. And it's very nice. It's pretty much archetypal Canadian whiskey, very soft, quite sweet and smooth, easy drinking. Really. Wish Mountain by Anon. Amaryllis. My mind had scarcely begun to dream before a pair of hands squeezed my shoulders. Wake up, Amaryllis, said a child's voice. If the ache in my body was any form of reliable clock, it was past midnight, and a handful of hours since we returned to the tent. I shrugged off the clingy fingers and turned on my back. The face mingled with the shadow in the dark, belonging to an 8-year-old lolly named Lily. Chicory's run away again, she said. She watched me grow in size as I climbed to my feet. I was taller than her, owed to being 4 years older. Not that being taller than little Lily was a high threshold to beat. When did he leave the tent? I said. Just now. He walked in the forest. Okay, go back to sleep. Lily did as she was told. The heat inside the tent was close to unbearable. There was only one thin slit at the entrance to allow relief from the smell of the sweat in the forest the 49 other children waged side by side. Because there were so many children, I had no other option but to step on them in order to reach the exit. They were so used to me leaving the tent to find Chicory every other night, and they knew it was easier to pretend to be asleep than to kick up a fuss over being stepped on. Once outside the tent, I took in fresh air and a usual sense of smallness. Unbridled nature, with huge illumined trees lay in every direction, except for the wide dirt road ahead. Remembering that it was Chicory I was looking for, I headed left and passed between two large bushes. I wasn't scared, but being 12 years of age meant there was little I could do if I found something big hunting for prey in the woods. The Guardians told creative tales of wolves and bears in the forests. Oh my! To keep the children too afraid to wander from the tent at night. But the scariest tale they told was the true one. The implication of the dangers that could befall a child if they were to cross a fugitive newly on the run from root work. A man on the run with nothing left to lose could take a child hostage, if it meant he might better avoid jail or execution. Because the job of the orphans at Rootwork was to deliver food and drink and other provisions around town and down in the mines, I was able to learn through eavesdropping how coal miners had come to work such a terrible job. When a man worked up debts in Rose Kingdom and could no longer afford to meet his payments, he was given a choice: a life in a windowless dungeon cell or life at Rootwork. If the man chose Rootwork, he lived not only in the town owned by the company, he earned a wage not in coin but in receipts, which he could spend at the company-owned store. The company, being the only place workers could buy goods, sold the food, drink, and the other items the man needed for far more than they were worth. And for that reason, the workers became slaves in all but name. They worked for the company the rest of their lives unless they chose a third option: escape. The idea of meeting such a fugitive in the woods played on my mind, but failing to bring back Chicory before the Guardians found out he was gone was what really scared me. Tears and cries for mercy were in vain when the Guardians decided a rule had been broken, and a hard caning was in order. The caning didn't stop until the back of the punished child's hand was reduced to an open wound deep enough to leave a scar. Chicory, being 6 years of age and one of the youngest children adopted by Rootwork, hadn't yet experienced that agony. I reached the edge of the forest and came to a stop before a vast field of knee-high grass, spotted Chicory ahead at the top of a small hill. My chest was seized up for all the running I'd done, but the panic of losing him was over, and for that I could now breathe a sigh of relief. Once I wandered over to his side, it felt good to kneel on the soft soil. Chicory was crouched low and pulling out fistfuls of grass. Although busily going about this task, Chicory's face looked as if he was asleep. If I were to reach over and grab hold of him and woken him up, but not normally. Instead, he would have screamed like some pained creature until his throat was hoarse. Chicory's bouts of screaming during the night, but before I learned better than to wake him, I earned him an even greater amount of dislike from the other orphans than he already had before. The other orphans preferred to give him a wide berth, chiefly because his skin was dark like soil, his black hair tightly curled, his nose broad, nostrils large, and his lips thick like a girl's. Although it was different to Rosian children, who had cream-colored skin, eyes of blue or amber or green, and silky hair of various autumn colors. Chicory, like me, was a half-breed. He left the braids of glass in his hands to be caught by the breeze. We were far out of range from anyone that might hear him scream if I did wake him, but so long as I was gentle, I could take him back to the tent without having to wake him at all. Perhaps my readiness to stay on the hilltop a while instead of returning to the tent came as a result of the routine Chicory's strange behavior had brought about. Spending any amount of time with him was an exercise of patience. We were spending time in a way that I didn't hate. The cold was starting to bother me because I was wearing a threadbare sleeveless shirt and equally tattered shorts, leaving much of my skin exposed to the breeze. Chicory bundled himself in a ball and began to roll down the hill. The sight of this had me overcome with a sudden fit of laughter, but then he picked up speed. I watched him roll still further and faster down the hill for a moment, before gaining enough sense to call after him and give chase. Chicory! Running down the hill, I dreaded to think what state I would find Chicory in once I reached him. Stooping to where I last saw the tall grass rustle, I peered down to see Chicory awake and upright. Grey bile slopped down his chin, and his face glistened like wet clay. "Are you in any pain?" I asked. "I am sorry," he said, pathetically. All around us became still. The field, which moments ago felt alive with insects, made no sound whatsoever. There were no longer any stars in the sky. Huddling close to Chicory, I did my best to try and make sense of the strange veil of darkness which blotted out our surroundings. Chicory clung close to me with his tiny hands. What's happening, Anne-Marie?" "I don't know," I said. Something blazing bright and gold and loud as 100 drums struck in the ground to our left. In the absence of any available exit from the blackness which surrounded us, I took hold of Chicory and held him in my arms and carried him, as I walked at a marching pace, back up the hill. With each step I took gold lightning, struck with greater frequency, punching down left and right, in front and behind, as if teasing the inevitable blows that intended to befall us. We reached the top of the hill, but Chicory slipped from my arms as before. I could continue on outward. But Chicory slipped from my arms before I could continue onward without him. I couldn't hear the screams leaving my own mouth. Another flash of light followed by a deafening noise illuminated Chicory's terrified expression before he was engulfed by the black shadowy smoke. I felt the heat of the lightning striking me before I was aware of anything else. The extreme pain lasted longer than an instant and engulfed all my senses. But all I could think of was the regret of not keeping Chicory safe. Well then.
Nice read.
Thanks. Practiced. Well, not this one. This is a blind, reaction, but yeah.
Oh, would you like to go ahead and share your thoughts first?
Well, okay. It feels like an introduction to a longer story. I'd be very disappointed if this was it, because fucking nothing is explained, but it's also not inexplicable or weird or mysterious enough to really constitute horror. It's just weird supernatural thing happens to weird kid. And especially then, also with all this exposition about, this company town, about the script, about the fugitives, it's a Chekhov's gun, and that means it has to be fired at some point. I want to see your root work. I want to see the fugitives. I want to see the, tyranny of capitalism or whatever. And I want to see the orphans. In this introduction or short story, we don't actually get any of that. And the same thing with this little introduction. We don't need Lily here because she doesn't do anything.
Yeah, I had similar thoughts. My first impression was that there was a lot of exposition. In fact, I thought pretty much you could start it at where you start at the line, "Chicory, like me, was a half-breed." I think that is a much better opening place to start at and just kind of shift some of the exposition around.
Yeah.
Move on to, let's say she gets hit by lightning and then she has to go to the company town to see if anybody heard what happened to Chicory, and then you can start building into this world. But when you start out the entire chapter with saying, here's a tome of all of my world's design, it's a bit much.
Yeah, it's a bit much. And I think in certain situations, you can get away with doing that. But the problem is, you have to have a really fucking fascinating idea to do that, and we don't have that.
Right.
Yeah, and also just looping back around to what I said about Lily here. She's a complete non-character and basically just a tool to get Amy or Amory or whatever into the scene. But I thought you could have easily done this in 2 lines by saying, I woke up, like my fellow half-breed Chicory was gone.
You can bring in that idea of, okay, we're both half-breeds, which immediately also establishes that there's a relationship between the main character and Chicory.
Yeah, a reason to find them.
And you've also established that half-breeds are abnormal. One, you've determined that they are, one, half-breeds, which means they're different from everybody else, and two, that she's concerned about him, which means she has that relationship. So I think I agree with you. You can remove Lily and you would immediately have a much stronger opening. All the crap about company stores, you could probably keep the thing about the Guardians getting like caning people, because I think that plays into some of the passing of the time for the
Yeah.
story. And then you immediately have the gold lightning part, and then the chapter's over.
Yeah.
I think that's a better way to structure it.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Because then you save all of this exposition for when it's actually required in the story. And you just also keep up the narrative tension, which is like one of my major complaints with the exposition reduces tension because you're telling me stuff that's not immediately happening or it's threatening to happen. Granted, the writing style, I just thought the prose isn't strong enough to convey the ideas. It's extremely perfunctory and basic. So that's obviously a flaw in of itself, but this idea of put yourself in Amory's shoes, your little bro is gone, one of you is going to get fucked up, maybe both. Your slaves, you have to get him, before the bear eats him, the fugitive stabs him, whatever. You're stressing. And obviously then, because Amory is a sympathetic character, you want the reader to be stressing too. And so if, she's running around, she's pacing, she's looking for him, batting through the bushes, hiking up this hill, breath heavy, covered in sweat, night running out, thinking, every little noise is another chance for Chicory to get hurt. That's high tension, but we don't have that because instead of this description, so we live in the company town, which I don't care about
Yeah.
because that's not what you've told me to focus on in this chapter. That's not the focus.
Right. By sort of using these lines for exposition to sort of deflate the tension, like you said, lose a lot of that ability to keep the reader really invested in the story. And I understand that this is a submission to the podcast, so you sort of have to bring them into here's where the world is. But the problem is when you do that, even for a submission, what it does is it doesn't entice anybody to sort of read more because they see that this is the flaw and you're not really there's no hook. There's no hook there either to continue to read on. Because, okay, we see that you expedition dumped and you got hit by a bolt of lightning, but because you had the expedition dump, there was no tension to be built in the scene and there's no interest in reading further.
And what I also think about this is, even if you are just showing this as a snippet for critique, we don't need the exposition. Because I know what a slave is. It doesn't matter if root work is in Fantasyland or it's in the United States. I know what slaves are, I know what a company town is, because this is general knowledge for anyone who reads books. Now, I know people in Lit don't actually read books. Personally, I've never read a single book in my life. I just pretend to and read TV tropes instead. But yeah, it's like we know what these basic concepts are. So I don't need all of this exposition because I know what these things are. So Chicory is gone. Chicory is my fellow slave, half-breed. All right, I'm going to get caned if I don't find them. That's all the stakes I need. I don't need to know the geopolitical history of the location to care about any of that.
It's a matter of what you're going to focus your story on. And I think it's the best thing that can be said about this is that it's unfocused on what it's trying to convey because it has tension that it is trying to build. It's just not focused on it. And if you really want to have a story that's incredibly strong, you have to understand, okay, this story is going to be character focused. So exposition needs to be saved for when it needs to be available, as opposed to I have this space but they need to know the whole background of why this character is in this position. That's not necessarily true.
Yeah.
It's more than acceptable to leave a reader wondering what in the hell is going on and explain sort of the exposition through dialogue or through interactions with other characters or even just plain exposition.
Yeah, I'd agree. And I think with a lot of this, you don't need to have this exposition immediately. It's like you can keep somebody wondering, you can keep them inquisitive, and it's not going to be an insulting or offensive reveal to, okay, here is the setting in which root work belongs. Because it's just saying, oh, so that's the context for this. And like one of my favorite examples, I think it's from How Not to Write a Book, is saying, if I need to know about the character's parents for the story to make sense, why don't I also need to have to know about their grandparents? And we just don't. And 90% of the time, you don't. Because I can tell what a character is like from what they're doing now, not from the context that shaped them.
Right. That's a good quote to think about, especially when you're trying to figure out how do I focus the story that I'm writing a little bit better?
Yeah.
How do I make sure that it's not this sort of strewn about story where things are too muddy in order to make a story that's a lot more tight, focused, and just better to read.
I think the major issue with this one is focus. Though I'd say just the prose comes in a second place, at least for me, because I thought with a lot of this, now, saying ESL, it's a bit of a like non-term. We have fantastic books written by people who are not mother tongue English. But I mean, that's what it sort of says to me, because they're using words to very almost visually convey it. It's like this was imagined as, a movie scene and somebody's transcribed it in the most literal possible terms, the most basic and easy to understand terms, which I think is very much to the story's detriment, especially with these last two paragraphs of the lightning. Because for me, at least, it was very disorienting. It's kind of hard to follow where is the lightning, how much is there, what's happening. And especially just with the descriptions about it, like marching at a walking pace. Sister, there's fucking lightning. You run when you see lightning.
Yeah, I agree with you on the prose, and I think the issue that I have with the prose, it's not that it's necessarily bland or boring. It's simply there to convey, as you said. Even sometimes it's almost too visual,
Yeah.
where you have to sort of pause the flow of the story to sort of build the scene in your head. And when you break up that sort of pacing, it becomes very easy to fall out of what is already an unfocused story. Again, even the focus on the prose is just kind of another problem with this. And I think they were to upgrade the prose and tighten it up, this could be a pretty good start to what would be a longer story.
Yeah. This one is something that really needs a thorough edit. So, on the one hand, thanks, Anon, for submitting it to Writing General and, the Unreal Press. Hope the comments have been helpful and, you get better at doing this. But yeah, it's a first draft, and it's like, I think a lot of these things could actually just be solved if you ran this through a spell checker, because I did notice a few other punctuation errors. And like, I know Word spell checkers Grammarly, it's not a great tool for fiction, and often it can be detrimental. But like, just the utter fucking rudimentary things, the fundamentals of writing, you can clear up very easily with a program like that. And also, things like word choice and word repetition, it can become very samey unless you're doing it intentionally. And obviously we've agreed they're not, because it's not focused. And there's no clear direction that the prose is going in here.
I think definitely increasing their prose strength would be really helpful here. And doing a cursory edit of a rough draft really allows you to see things that you missed. Even if you take a day or two to just work on some other projects, and you come back to it and you think, God, who's the maniac who wrote this? This is garbage. And then you tighten it up a little bit, and you have immediately you see an exponential increase in quality.
Yeah, and one thing I found that works very well for this is read it out loud. Often you write something and it looks nice, it reads well on the page, and you move on. And that's why I'd say, if you edit something, especially for the first draft, read it out loud, because you will often intentionally correct poor phrasing. And, if anyone is paying attention, I did this when I read both of these things out, is if something doesn't sound right, or at least not to your dialect, you will subconsciously switch it for a similar word. And I'm saying then, do that when you rewrite it. Put in the good words. And as well, if you find something that's clunky, it's clunky.
Yeah, I agree with you. Reading out your stories, particularly dialogue, and sometimes not necessarily dialogue, is really a good way to sort of figure out why it doesn't sound right. You can fall into a bad trap with dialogue where you try to make it too realistic, and then it doesn't read correctly. It reads too, let's say, casual or too fluid, but it doesn't read the way that a good traditional dialogue in a book should actually read.
Yeah, I think that is a great risk about making dialogue realistic, because if you pay attention to people talk, and if you have any like rudimentary understanding of linguistics, I'm talking like GCSE linguistics, people pause, they repeat themselves, they stop, they restart sentences, they use filler words, which is just something you do not need in dialogue. So I think dialogue doesn't always have to one for one portray what a character is saying, because we're not writing a movie script, we're representing the world through text. And, one of my favorite examples of this is pay attention to how elderly people speak. Because a lot of them will say, yeah. They will say, or like. But if you write those words in a story, these are things we culturally associate with the younger generation. There's a level of artificiality here, and I think we can sort of see the opposite here, actually, in the text. Like this dialogue where Amory asks, are you in any pain? And Cherie says, I'm sorry, he said pathetically. Well, obviously, first, you do not need that many tags. We know he's speaking. And again, it's like, would, a 12-year-old girl immediately default to, are you in any pain? No.
What you're saying is correct. And it's not just about the actual text of the dialogue, it's about what is also being said. And that kind of sounds like the same thing. But, a 12-year-old girl wouldn't say, are you in any pain? That sounds like something if you're in a hospital room after a major surgery and the nurse comes in. Are you in any pain? Medication? The following two tags, what's happening, Amory, and I don't know. I guess they're okay as well. I don't know if a kid would say what's happening. It's I think about the voice of the characters, what they would convey through their dialogue as well. Like you said, like and not the like and those are sort of associated with younger generation.
Yeah,
it wouldn't be really said by older people.
Yeah, it's that sort of sentiment, and I think that's also an issue because it doesn't build character, because dialogue is one of the strongest tools somebody has to show what their characters are like, what they want, what they do. And when you have very basic dialogue like this, it really just doesn't fucking work. And an example, let's say take Less Than Zero, which is one of my favorite books by Bret Easton Ellis. The writing is extremely plain. It's beige prose to the max. B just describes what's going on, doesn't have thrills, doesn't have metaphors, just says, all right, this is what's happening, this is what people are doing. But the second he shifts to dialogue, the dialogue is almost like one-for-one accurate to late teens, early 20s Californians in the 80s. Because that's how we get the character. And we don't have that here because the dialogue is written basically in the same tone as the narration. But the problem is, even though this is in first person, Amory doesn't talk like that. Because Amory is a child, and children do not think like this. Yeah, we excuse it in narration because we have to tell the story, but it is inexcusable in dialogue.
Right. And I think my closing thoughts really on this piece as a whole, cycling back to the whole focus thing, and there's not really a lot of dialogue here to really critique, which is good, because if there was, especially if I saw like a line about her muttering, Chicory, where are you in the woods? And so much of your time in silence throughout your day, it's really not natural to see those sorts of things. I was very pleased to not see that. I think the prose could definitely be upgraded. We can remove Lily, and I think I'd like to see a little bit more before I make sort of final judgment calls on this writer's quality as a whole. But if there was like another chapter or two, I'd read through it before I could say definitively what really needs to be fixed in their core skills.
Yeah. I'd also say, what is Wish Mountain? Presumably, you get struck by the magic golden lightning, you get your wish granted or something, but it's an odd title for this, and yeah, I think it really just characterizes what we have here. We don't have focus.
You're wishing for focus.
Yeah, and I think on that note, thanks for listening, and of course, thanks for coming on, Miles. Glad I can, finally grant your wish of being on the Unreal Press podcast.
I'm very glad that you guys allowed me on, and this is a great podcast. You guys have awesome content, and of course you cater to a very well-known demographic that we're all a part of. So it's good to be on. I'm glad you had me on as a guest.
Cool, thanks. You're welcome on any other time. And so until next time, this has been the Unreal Press continual search of algorithm acceptable content. And today we've reviewed 2 writing pieces by the notorious hacker known only as 4chan. Until next time, cheers.
I may have gone too far in a few places.